Hello and welcome to Mentora IAS. I am Safir and today we are going to talk about the Gen Z protests of Nepal that have rocked the politics of Nepal. आज हम इस सेशन में बात करने वाले हैं कि जो Gen Z प्रोटेस्ट नेपाल में हुई है जिसकी वजह से पूरी की पूरी नेपाली पॉलिटिक्स जो है उसकी कायापलट हो गई है. So what has happened is that these Gen Z protests of Nepal have been distinguished around the world for the way that they have been coordinated, the way in which the outcomes have come, and subsequently the aftermath of this particular protest. So let us dive deep into this particular topic to understand how exactly this protest unfolded. And on the backdrop of this, we are also going to understand a survey of the India-Nepal relation. तो इस पर्टिकुलर सेशन में हम अब आगे बढ़ते हैं जिसमें हम ये समझने की कोशिश करेंगे कि हाउ एग्जैक्टली हमारे नेपाल की ये जो जेनजी प्रोटेस्ट थी इसका अनफोल्डिंग हुआ, हाउ एग्जैक्टली इट चेंज द डायरेक्शन ऑफ नेपाल, और नेपाल और इंडिया के रिलेशंस का भी एक ब्रीफ सर्वे देखते हैं. सो प्लीज एंश्योर दैट यू आर इन द वीडियो till the very end so that you can understand not just the story behind the Nepal protests but also at the same time the relation between India and Nepal, क्योंकि आज we are going to discuss this with respect to three different aspects. हम इसकी geography history भी देखेंगे, हम IR भी देखेंगे, हम internal security भी देखेंगे. So if you like this video, please like it and at the same time also do comment and tell us how exactly these videos have been going on for you. So let us begin. Gen Z protests of Nepal के बारे में बात करते हैं. तो when we talk about Gen Z, okay, this particular group, this is actually a cohort of people, this is actually a group of people who have been born, okay, they are the ones who have been born between 1997, some say 1996, some say 1997, okay, to 2012. The individuals who basically have been born in this particular time is called the group of Gen Z. Okay, now this particular group as of now is the most exposed to the kinds of technology that has been there in the world. इससे पहले की जो generation है, that generation was the one which saw the beginning of mobile technology, which saw the beginning of internet getting a public resource kind of status. Okay, it basically was more inclined towards manual labor industries and all. But with the advent of internet, with the advent of computer and development of softwares, a lot of things have automated. And because of this automation, what has happened, there is enormous potential through the use of internet to make money. And subsequently, from 1996 onwards, internet basically becomes a commodity which could be used by a lot of people around the world. Okay, if I talk about India, so in India, the internet was introduced around 1995, and since then, gradually we see that internet technology and telecommunication technologies have actually evolved over time. Okay, so 1995 से लेके 2025 के बीच में जो हमारी टेलीकम्युनिकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी है उसके कई सारे फेजेस रहे हैं. ठीक है, स्पीड बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ी है. एट द सेम टाइम हमारे जो पूरी की पूरी यूज़ ऑफ इंटरनेट है वो चेंज हो गया. Back in 1995, internet was basically used mostly for mailing purposes, for weather forecasting and important information dissemination. Not a lot of glossy websites, very simple kind of websites were used to be the thing of the day. Gradually, the speed at which you could be surfing the internet. ठीक है, तो internet is always served. It is never that you are using internet. It is internet surfing. Okay, that increased. The amount of content on the internet increased, and subsequently we see that internet is now put to use for making money. Okay, so with the gradual advancement of the telecommunication technology, we moved from you can say dial-up connections to broadband. From broadband we moved towards mobile telephony. In that we have 2G, 3G, 4G. Currently we are in 5G, experimenting towards the 6G. So what has happened is that the devices have become smaller, the internet has become more engaging, and at the same time there are so many different ways in which you can be using internet to make money, to understand things, to learn something new, and at the same time to reach out to people across the world, okay, seamlessly. So without internet, this life of especially this generation seems to be very difficult. This is not the generation that is used to a lot of power disconnections. This is not a generation that is used to a lot of internet disruptions. But this video is not about how exactly they are different, but this video is about how they as a group have change the way people look at this particular cohort of the entire group. Okay, तो ये जो बच्चे हैं इन्होंने इस चीज को बताया कि भाई हम सिर्फ टेक्नोलॉजी को यूज करने वाले लोग नहीं हैं, हम इस टेक्नोलॉजी को यूज करके पूरी की पूरी प्रोटेस्ट को भी सर्वे कर सकते हैं, कोऑर्डिनेट कर सकते हैं और पूरी पूरी सरकार भी पलट सकते हैं. So let us understand how exactly did this protest turn the Nepalese politics upside down. Okay, so this entire, you can say, sequence of events revolves around two different things. Okay, so what exactly are the reasons? The first reason, okay, is discriminatory opportunities or discrimination, or for that matter, I'll write it down in a better word, lack of opportunity. Okay, that's the primary one. The second one, government's intention to curtail the liberties of people. Okay, how? So with respect to the first one, the lack of opportunities, now this is something where the problem begins. Okay, so for the past few months in the social media websites like Facebook, there has been a page that was created. Okay, page of Facebook. I am writing FP because I believe you are at least used to these particular abbreviations, and that was called Next Generation Nepal. It has a broad user base. Most of the users of this particular page are actually the Gen Z people. Okay, now the point being, in this particular group, these users actually used to post about the dismal conditions in Nepal, that is the deteriorating economic health, the corruption in the political system, and at the same time how the lack of opportunities is actually manifesting in frustration of the people. Now the point being, this lack of opportunity was something that was significantly magnified by the way in which there have been a difference between the generation which is there from Nepal but not facing the same problem as these people. How? Now these are the people who are actually called Nepo kids. Okay, so there have been two very famous you can say hashtags, Nepo kids, Nepo babies. Both of them basically come from the term nepotism. So nepotism basically is a term that comes from Greek and Italian descent, where this particular term has the root that means nephew. Okay, so in literal terms, if we talk about nepotism, so this is the privileges that a particular individual gets just because of the fact that their parents have been some famous people. So usually this particular term is actually used in the context of the you can say Hollywood and Bollywood celebrities. This is used in the context of political people and something like that. Okay, so nepotism is about being privileged for being born into an influential family. So this is not just a term that actually is limited to Nepal. Please do not take this Nepo only to be limited to Nepal. Okay, although these hashtags have been very common, but the reason is this, that they have the privilege of being born into influential families, meaning that they could be rulers, they could be politicians, they could be people who are there in the entertainment industry, who have got influence in the society, who have got money and resources. Okay, and because of that, their children are the one who are being treated differently. So this is basically the primary grievance of the youth of Nepal, that there are such individuals who basically are the children of these ex-monarchs, ex-politicians, or even the current politicians who have been living off a luxurious life full of opportunities, and they have no knowledge of the hardships that the Nepalese youth of the day are facing. Okay, so they want this disparity to go away. So what exactly is the perception? That there are two different categories. One are these comfort kids, and one are the youth at large. So these are basically the one who have been called Nepo kids, because they are the one who are educated in foreign, they are earning there, they have nothing to do with Nepal, and at the same time they have reached there because their parents were in some way earning their money from Nepal. And there is a perception that all of these have reached there because the parents have actually undertaken some kind of corruption, some kind of atrocity in Nepal. Okay, and then that money is the one which is used to finance their lives. So now what has happened is that in order to correct this imbalance, this Gen Z people, they already came up with the idea that we need to do something about it. We need to reject this entire political system. Okay, but what came as the trigger was the government's ban to have 26 different social media websites discontinued in Nepal. So the government basically said register with the authorities. Okay, now these different companies are basically Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or X, okay, for that matter YouTube, okay, and such companies. Okay, now these companies are basically the one which have large subscriber base in Nepal. Okay, they have a large, very large user base, and it also includes Facebook and Instagram, it also includes WhatsApp. Okay, we ourselves understand how indispensable WhatsApp has become for us. Okay, now what happened was that the government said these companies should register with the authorities under the Nepalese Information Ministry. None of these companies registered, and as a result the government actually introduced a ban. Okay, and the ban extended to 26 different companies. Now the problem is that this particular ban was a ban on the voices of 30 million Nepali users. Okay, so about 30 million Nepali users are actually registered on these 26 different social media companies, where they used to vent out their anger against the government's corrupt system. Now with the implementation of this particular ban, it was perceived as a way of taking away the very idea of expression from the people. And subsequently, as a result of this ban, there is a non-profit organization that is called Hami Nepal. Okay, so Hami Nepal is actually a non-profit organization that is associated with providing relief during natural disasters like earthquake and flooding in Nepal. Okay, now this particular organization, it actually said that we are going to organize a protest. Okay, this protest was supposed to be peaceful, and for this particular protest a lot of people actually came down to the capital city of Nepal, Kathmandu, and at the same time the protest also took place in other cities of Nepal as well. So technically it was Hami Nepal which came up as the organization to protest against this particular social media ban. And subsequently what happened was that these individuals who basically were the protesters, okay, they actually surrounded the parliament. They surrounded the parliament, and subsequently they wanted a lift on these bans, that this ban should be cancelled. Okay, now these protesters, in order to pressurize the government, they wanted to enter inside the compound of the parliament. Now when this was something which was tried by them, so at that particular time the Nepalese forces, the security forces or the police forces, they charged these particular protesters with batons, tear gases and water cannons. and rubber bullets. So when this situation turned chaotic, so at that particular time the outcome was that 19 such individuals died. Okay. So when we talk about this particular protest, this is the protest simmering up. Okay. So this is basically the protest simmering up. This is September 8th. Okay. Now what has happened is that due to this 8th September protest, okay, and due to the action of the police, 19 protesters died. Okay. So this is basically the time when the police is actually confronting with the protesters. And this particular individual that you are seeing here, this is the face of Hami Nepal. He is Sudan Gurung. Okay. He basically is a rapper as of now, but also at the same time the leader of Hami Nepal non-profit organization. Okay. Now the point is that this confrontation began, and once it began, it costed lives of 19 people. Okay, 19 people died in this particular confrontation on 8th of September. Okay. So when we talk about this, so what comes up is that there are 19 people that died. And subsequently then we see that the Home Minister of Nepal resigns. Okay. So 19 protesters die. The second thing that happens, there is lift of ban by evening. Okay. This is again on 8th of September. This is again 8th of September. Okay. The next thing, after this, taking on the responsibility for these 19 protesters, the Home Minister of Nepal resigns. But this particular protest now turns chaotic. When this news releases, when this news breaks into the public of Nepal, okay, now the Gen Z protesters turn violent. Okay, and they go on rampage on 9th September. And on 9th September, what happened? That this particular rampage was caused by storming of government buildings like the Supreme Court of Nepal, the burning down of the house of the Prime Minister, the burning down of the Nepalese Federal Parliament. Okay, and this is something which the protesters then did. They completely overtook the security forces of Nepal at that particular time, and they went on rampage. They roughed up the politicians from all the political spectrum. They manhandled a lot of ministers from the cabinet. They manhandled a lot of previous prime ministers as well. Okay, and as a consequence, the wives of one of the prime ministers, okay, she actually succumbed to the injuries of she sustained due to the burning of the house. So a lot of their houses, their private properties were also razed to the ground. Okay, so this is something which happened by the Gen Z, and in order to control this, now the Nepalese army is rolled out. Okay, so Nepalese army is now on the streets to calm this protest. The police are completely overwhelmed, and the Nepalese army right now are protecting two very important people, the President of Nepal and the incumbent Prime Minister KP Oli. They are actually being you can say protected by the Nepalese army in an undisclosed location. Okay, so because of this entire rampage event, what happens is that this causes the resignation of the Prime Minister. Okay, so resignation of Prime Minister follows this particular rampage, and subsequently the entire government of Nepal falls. So that is basically what happened. Okay, now the interesting part about this is that when we talk about the entire coordination that happened with respect to this entire protest was done using 3 social media apps that could circumvent the ban. Okay, the first of them is actually called Discord. Okay, now this is the name of this particular app. The second one, you might be knowing this, it is TikTok. And the third one that they have basically is Viber. So using these three apps, the entire protests were coordinated. Okay. Now this particular you can say application was used for making calls. When you talk about Discord, now this is an application which is very similar in use to WhatsApp and Telegram. Here this particular app could be used for sharing media, for taking voice call and video call, and at the same time sending texts. Okay. So through this there are a large, you can say, groups that have actually been created for chatting, that is basically called servers. Okay, just like we have groups in WhatsApp, here we basically have got servers, and in those servers basically the entire coordination was basically done. So for the first time this is being seen that social media platforms have been used for coordination of a mass mobilized movement. Okay, so this particular app Discord, as of now, New York Times, according to New York Times, what has been said is that it is actually the current parliament of Nepal. Okay, so this Discord app is where the parliament of Nepal is. I'll tell you why exactly is this. They have quoted this, New York Times. Okay, so now let us talk about what exactly has been the outcome. So the first outcome we have discussed, that the Prime Minister, the incumbent Prime Minister resigned. So this is KP Oli, he resigned. Now there is the Nepal Army Chief General. Okay, now the Nepal Army Chief is basically the one who has been requesting the protesters to calm down and find a political solution to this thing. Okay, so the Nepal Army Chief was basically the one who could bring the protesters in talking terms, and subsequently the protesters conducted a kind of informal poll over Discord. Okay, they conducted an informal poll over Discord, and subsequently from that poll this particular name, okay, and she is Sushila Karki. This name was the one which was suggested by the protesters to become the interim head. So she is currently the interim head or interim Prime Minister of Nepal. Now when you talk about Sushila Karki is a former Chief Justice of Nepal Supreme Court. Okay, so when her name was nominated by the protesters, the President of Nepal, Ramchandra Paudel, he said that the Nepalese constitution does not allow appointment of a former Chief Justice of Nepal as the Prime Minister. So this is an extra constitutional thing which was not supposed to happen, but he had to bend under the demands of the protesters. Okay, and subsequently Sushila Karki became the first woman Prime Minister of Nepal as of now. At the same time, the President also dissolved the Parliament, and subsequently a new date, March 5, 2026 has been decided to be the date for Nepal parliamentary elections. This is basically the entire story. And on one side of Nepal, this is something which is going on, and on the other side, okay, outside the governmental circles, the cleanup activity started with the same protesters. The protesters who raised the buildings, who created chaos, now were the one who are also cleaning up the streets voluntarily. Okay, so on 10th of September, this distinct feature was one thing that was seen in the streets of Nepal, whichever were affected by the protests. Okay, so all the rubble, all the destruction that was done, that was being cleaned off by massive drives that were taken out by the Gen Z people. Okay, so in this particular regard, there are certain interesting things that we should be knowing about. What are the features? Features of protest. So when we talk about the features of protest, the first and foremost thing, no leader. There is no leader of this particular protest. The next thing, no political affiliation. They have completely kept themselves away from political parties, and at the same time they have roughed up every single political party representative. Okay, the next thing, social media coordination. This is the next thing that they have. Okay, and finally, when we talk about the objectives were the ones which were said after the upheaval happened. Then the objectives were the one which were set. Okay, so the first objective is basically establishment of a corruption free government. Corruption free government, that's the first thing that they said. Okay, second thing, better opportunities for Nepalis. The third thing that they said, inviting international investments, especially from India. They invited India to invest more in Nepal. Okay, and then they said that the basic civic amenities should be provided to all the people. So this is basically the features of this entire protest. I hope this is something which becomes clear. Now we are going to move ahead to the next part. Okay, how does this particular thing concern India? So the very first thing that happened after the rampage took place was that the Prime Minister convened the meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security. Okay, so Cabinet Committee on Security is basically a committee of ministers. Okay, and they basically come together to deliberate upon what exactly needs to be the steps taken in order to get prepared for the challenge from Nepal. Okay, so Cabinet Committee on Security is responsible for looking into the overall law and order situation in the country. At the same time, if there are any external threats which are there, how to respond to them. Okay, so this basically has a group of a lot of ministers, and it is headed by the Prime Minister. Okay, so the Cabinet Committee on Security was convened, and subsequently it was decided that the border vigilance in the India-Nepal border and India-Bhutan border should be stepped up, and at the same time there should be a very keen watch that should be taking place with respect to the developments in Nepal. So the intelligence agencies, the diplomatic missions that we have, and all the diplomats have been placed under high alert for this entire situation. Okay, the next thing, refugees. Now what has happened is, during the time when Nepal underwent this particular protest, there were a lot of Indian tourists who are actually there. Okay, and many of them allegedly said that they have been discriminated and mistreated. Apart from that, a lot of people from Nepal were in India. Okay, because India and Nepal have a very unique relationship, that they have an open border. Okay, so that is why a lot of people who actually were from Nepal could not return back after their day's work, because the borders were sealed as a security measure. Okay, and at the same time, this refugee pressure, that if this thing goes out of hand, the people will start coming towards India. So we need to have some kind of check at the border. Okay, economic disruption, basically it means that the bilateral trade and the supply of essential goods, of which a large part is done by India, will be significantly affected. Apart from that, there will be effect with respect to the investments that Indians have made, with respect to industries, with respect to the shutting down of the factories and things. Okay, the China factor. So the China factor basically means that with the gradual lowering of the influence of India, it is China which is going to influence the Nepalese decision making process, and whenever there is a political vacuum, there is always some kind of propaganda that comes from various players, and subsequently in that particular manner, the Chinese influence need to be countered, or for that matter, the impact of this entire thing on the Chinese is going to be a very important thing for India. Okay, and then regional instability. Now regional instability has been the cause, because when you talk about it, right now India is surrounded on three sides by politically unstable neighbors. Okay, right now it is Nepal on the north, Bangladesh on the east, Sri Lanka on the south, and if you want to take Myanmar on the east as well. Political instability is rife in the region, and when that is the case, it is something which becomes the harbor of a lot of different types of criminal activities, like trans-border crimes like kidnapping, smuggling, drug peddling, human trafficking. Okay, so this is basically how we are going to see that India is going to be concerned with all of these things. Now let us take a survey of what exactly has been the relation between India and Nepal. Okay. So when we talk about how this topic is to be covered in its entirety, so when you're talking about Nepal, the first thing that should come to your mind is that this is a neighbor of India. And when it is a neighbor of India, it is extremely important that we at least have an idea of how does this country look like, what exactly are the border conditions with India, which states share the border of this particular country. Okay. So that's the first part, geographical aspect. The second thing, Nepal and India have got extremely close cultural ties. If you have read this in history or have some idea about history, you might be knowing that there is a connection both in terms of Gautam Buddha as well as Ramayana. Okay, so that's the second part. So history and culture, JS1 paper covered, geographical features as well as history and culture. The second thing, when you talk about India and its neighbors, it becomes very, very important with respect to international relations. Okay, so in international relations, India's neighborhood, we need to evaluate this with respect to how historically the relations have been, what are the recent trends, and what exactly has been the Indian interest on this entire scenario. The third thing, GS paper 3. So with respect to the border management challenges and at the same time the use of social media and what social media is capable of with respect to maintaining the internal security of the country. Very, very important. Okay. So we are going to cover all these dimensions here. Okay. So we'll start with the very first one. We'll start with the formation of Nepal. Okay. So formation of Nepal or the foundation of Nepal is something which is age old. Okay. So in 1747, we have Prithviraj Shah or Prithvi Shah. Okay. Now Shah. He's basically a king, okay, who actually comes from the Tarai region of Nepal. Okay, so that is just in the you can say it is just in the vicinity of the Nepal and India border. We'll talk about it. Okay, let me first of all tell you the story. So this particular individual, Prithvi Shah, he basically establishes an empire or a kingdom. So he establishes, he is actually a Gurkha. Okay, he establishes a kingdom. And now what he is doing? He starts expeditions towards the Kathmandu Valley. So in 1769, he invades Kathmandu. Okay. After invading Kathmandu, he consolidates this entire region because there are smaller and smaller princes who are actually right now having control over various regions. So after invading Kathmandu in 1769, he finds this entire kingdom that he has developed as Nepal. Okay, so it started as a very, very small portion of land. Gradually and gradually with his expeditions, he started conquering land. He invaded into the Kathmandu Valley, invaded Kathmandu in 1769, and subsequently whatever his consolidated empire was, he called that as Nepal. Okay, and this particular individual dies in 1772. Now what happens is that from this point onwards, his relatives and his family carries out this expansion. Okay, so between 1772 to 1805, in this particular time, his widow, his brother's son, they carry out an extremely important expansion of Nepal. Okay, and this is something which actually gives us a glimpse of the current Nepal. Okay, so in 1805, if I have to tell you this, so in 1805, the territorial extent of Nepal, so this was basically from east of Satluj to west of Teesta. Okay. Now when you talk about Satluj, now Satluj is a river that enters India into Himachal Pradesh, and from Himachal Pradesh it flows through Punjab, and subsequently it is a tributary of Indus. It merges into Indus in Pakistan. Okay. So you can very well imagine that from the east of Satluj, that basically involves a portion of Uttarakhand and some portions of Himachal Pradesh. Okay. To the west of Teesta. Now Teesta is basically a river in Sikkim. Okay. This region was basically the greatest extent of Nepal ever, and this extent is something which is called as Greater Nepal. Okay. So this is Greater Nepal. I will just show you that with a zoom. So what you are seeing right now in this particular scenario is that this is where the Greater Nepal is. This region, which is actually India, okay, this region is Bangladesh, and this region is where Nepal was. So this was the greatest extent of Nepal that we had. So this is called Greater Nepal. Now what happened was that this was something which was not appreciated by the British. Okay, so the British did not appreciate this. So subsequently then what happened? That the British now wanted to seize control. So now what happens, that there is in 1814, okay, in 1814 there is a dispute over control of Butwal. Okay, now Butwal is basically a town in Nepal. Okay. So who is going to control this particular land of Butwal? Now this basically became a dispute between East India Company, I will be writing East India Company as EIC, and the Gurkha or the Shah dynasty. This results in the Anglo-Nepal War. And from this Anglo-Nepal War, Nepal is defeated. Nepal is defeated by the British East Indian Army. Now, there are two very important outcomes of this defeat. The first one is the impressive fight by the Gurkhas. And the next one is basically a treaty to demarcate boundary, that is called the Treaty of Sugauli. Treaty of Sugauli. Sugauli is a place in Bihar. Okay. So when you talk about the Gurkhas, now what happened is that with respect to the Gurkhas, now the Gurkhas were actually the one who were very, very valiant and fierce while fighting the British, and the British were extremely impressed. And that is why these Gurkhas were then admitted into the British Indian Army. Okay. At the same time, this tradition of the Gurkhas continues till today. Okay. Even today we have 39 Gurkha regiments in the Indian Army, and at the same time the Gurkhas are also recruited by the Great Britain for the Royal British Army as well. They are called the Royal Gurkha Brigades. Even today there are Gurkhas recruited from Nepal by Britain for their army. Okay, and that is basically because of this distinct tradition. Now with respect to the Treaty of Sugauli, now this was more about the settlement. So with respect to the Treaty of Sugauli, it basically said that Nepal lost the land, okay, it lost the land west of River Kali. Okay. So all the land west of River Kali was to go to the British. Then at the same time, it lost the land east of River Mechi. East of River Mechi to Kingdom of Sikkim. Okay, and at the same time, the entire Tarai region, the foothills of the Himalayas which are found in the region of Uttar Pradesh and the planar regions, okay, that was lost to the British, but a part of this was restored to Nepal later on. Okay, so this Treaty of Sugauli becomes the foundational agreement of demarcation of boundary between India and Nepal, and this particular provision, River Kali, and west of the River Kali is something which is going to be the international boundary between India and Nepal, becomes the sticking point even today. So we are going to discuss that as well. Okay, so I hope this is something which is clear. Now talking about the present day Nepal. Okay, so the present day Nepal is basically this, where we actually have a 1705 kilometers land border with Nepal. Okay, that is a 1705 kilometers land border with Nepal, and it is shared by 5 states. There are 5 states. Uttarakhand, Uttarakhand's official RTO registration number plate is UK, that code is UK, so that is Uttarakhand. Okay, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, for Bihar it is BR. Okay, then at the same time there is West Bengal and there is Sikkim, SK is for Sikkim. These are the 5 states with which Nepal shares a boundary. Okay, and at the same time there are a lot of rivers that actually flow down from Nepal and become important tributaries of river Ganga. Okay, very important tributaries of Ganga like Kosi, Gandak. Okay, they all flow from Nepal and they enter into India. So Nepal basically has got enormous hydropower potential as well. But at the same time, if you look at the northern neighbor of Nepal, now that is where you find China. Okay, so Nepal basically is a country that is sandwiched between 2 of the biggest countries of Southeast Asia by territory and with economic heft as well. Okay, so that is why this particular region of Nepal is actually called a buffer land. This is called a buffer land. So that is basically the land which separates 2 big militarily strong powers. Okay, and that is why Nepal has a very important geostrategic significance. Apart from that, if you focus on this particular region, okay, this is something which is called India's chicken's neck. Okay, India's chicken's neck is basically officially called the Siliguri corridor in West Bengal. Okay, so this is the Siliguri corridor of West Bengal. Now what happens is that this Siliguri corridor is actually a very narrow stretch of land. This narrow stretch of land has got Nepal on one side, Bangladesh on the other side, and India, whose land it is. Now this patch of land is the only connection from India, from the mainland India towards northeastern India. If this particular corridor is shut off for some reason, there is no direct connection of the mainland India with the northeast India, and that is why it is an extremely important choke point which needs to be defended. And for that to be defended, we also need to ensure that Nepal and Bangladesh, both of them are basically the countries where we have friendly, cordial relations, good cooperation with the government, and minimal interference of Chinese influence here. Very important. So now you basically might be understanding why we are so cordial with these countries. Apart from the shared culture that we have both with Nepal and Bangladesh, one more reason is countering China. Okay, so this is basically the geography of Nepal. Okay, now let us talk about the historical relations between India and Nepal. So India and Nepal have been interacting with each other from a very long time. Okay, so we go right in the past from the age of Buddhism. Okay, when there comes the age of you can say Mahajanpadas, at that particular time also there were no boundaries, there was no political unification. So people used to travel from one place to the other. Okay, so at that particular time we have the birth of a great religion, Buddhism. Okay, so Buddhism basically is the religion which you can say it started with Gautam Buddha, and Gautam Buddha was born in Lumbini, Nepal. Okay, so Lumbini in Nepal is a very important place. Okay, birthplace of Gautam Buddha. Then at the same time, when you talk about the next thing, Kapilavastu. So Kapilavastu was basically the capital of the Shakya clan. So this is basically where Gautam Buddha was actually the prince. Then at the same time, there is another very important place in Nepal, and that is called Janakpur. Now this is the birthplace of goddess Sita. Okay, the consort of Lord Rama in Ramayana. Okay, so that is how we see three very important spots here. Okay, but both of these, okay, when you talk about Lord Buddha, Gautam Buddha, or for that matter goddess Sita, both of them now come towards the Indian connection as well. With respect to goddess Sita, that is the matrimonial alliance. Okay, and subsequently with respect to Gautam Buddha, that was basically the search for knowledge and renunciation. So both of them actually come to India, spend most of their time within what is currently India, and they spread out their personalities and left an indelible mark. Okay, so that is why this is where the history starts. Then we have just discussed how we interacted during the time of British in India, and after the British went away from India, so in 1947, whatever were the standing treaties of Britain with respect to all the countries around India like Afghanistan, Nepal, okay, then Burma. So we actually inherited all of those treaties. So not just the borders, but also the treaties that were there with the British. And subsequently in 1947, whatever was the understanding of the British with Nepal that there will be peaceful relations between the two, we inherited the same thing. And subsequently in 1950, okay, in 1950 comes the first major thing. Okay, so in 1950 we have the Treaty of Friendship with Nepal. Very important. Okay, so because in 1950 India was also a nascent democracy, so India was very particular about two things, that we should be respecting territorial integrity and there should be no outside interference to internal affairs. So that is one of the first and foundational articles of this particular treaty, that there will be mutual respect between the two countries. Each of them is going to respect the independence and at the same time no interference in the internal affairs. Okay, so that's the first part, mutual respect. Then the next part when we talk about it is how exactly are they going to communicate with each other. So they actually said that if they have any kind of you can say strained relations with any other country apart from India and Nepal. So if India or Nepal had strained relations with any other country and this particular relations could hamper the friendship between India and Nepal, so that needs to be intimated. Okay, so there should be an intimation of friction with other countries. Just like India and Pakistan, they do not share a cordial bond. So at that particular time, India would communicate this to Nepal that we do not share a very cordial bond with Pakistan. So if you engage with Pakistan, please let us know because we are not comfortable with it. Okay, so intimation of friction with other countries. And at the same time, what was also seen was that if there was any misunderstanding between India and Nepal, that will be resolved through peaceful dialogue. Okay, the next thing, okay, and that was parity of nationals on both the sides. Okay, so it basically meant that the citizens of India will be treated with the same respect in Nepal as the citizens of Nepal, and the Nepali citizens in India are also going to be treated with the same respect as that with citizens of India. Okay, so it was said that they are going to have parity on two fronts. One was the economic parity and the other one was free movement. So with respect to economic parity, they said that there will be no harassment in accessing job opportunities or carrying out trade. Okay, if the Nepalis wanted to come and work in India, there is full freedom for them to be working, and subsequently if Indians go to Nepal, there will be full freedom for them to work as well. Okay, so there will be no discrimination in jobs or trade. The first thing. Then at the same time, they can be purchasing property, private property in each other's country. Very, very important that Nepalis can purchase property in India, Indians can also purchase property in Nepal. Okay, and at the same time, this free movement is something which came to be known as the open border mechanism. It basically meant that these two countries will not require any kind of hard borders in between them. So people can very easily cross over from one side to the other, provided that they have a proof of citizenship with them. Okay, and they will basically be allowed to cross over the border because you are allowed to work on the other side freely. Okay, so this was something which was there in 1950 as the Treaty of Friendship. So in this particular time, there was a rule of a particular dynasty, or you could say the prime minister, and that was basically called Rana. Okay, so in Nepal, there was the rule of Rana. Okay, so Ranas were basically hereditary prime ministers of Nepal who had concentrated all the powers within themselves, and subsequently they had reduced the honor of the monarchy, that was the Shah dynasty, to mere puppets. Okay, so this particular Rana's rule was the one which was first of all overthrown with the help of India. Because what happened during this particular time was that in 1950, India rescued the Nepalese royal family, and subsequently the royal family was the one which was taken back to India, and subsequently there was formation of Nepalese Congress Party and Nepalese Communist Party. Both of them were inspired by the Indian national movement, and subsequently they were the ones who actually led the revolution of people against the rule of Rana. And subsequently after this, okay, after this monarchy is established. Okay, so monarchy is established, and the monarch right now is King Tribhuvan. Okay, so this particular individual now says that okay, we are going to have a democratic setup, okay, and we will be a constitutional monarchy. Okay, so he basically says we will be having a constitutional monarchy. Now subsequently what happens is that the relations between India and Nepal have been very, very cordial. India has been helping Nepal with its political affairs. India also has pitched for Nepal in United Nations. Okay, so Nepal received the membership of the United Nations in 1955 due to persistent effort of India. But the point is, because India was helping a lot with the political setup of Nepal, now the perception of the people changed that India is interfering too much into the internal affairs of Nepal, and that was the violation of the Treaty of Friendship with Nepal. So now starts the change in perception. Okay, now basically what happens in that is that in 1960, okay, the king is changed. Okay, the king is changed, and in 1960, the king actually now uproots the democratic government, the democratic government is uprooted. Then at the same time, the next thing that the king does is basically that the king actually bans political parties, restricts freedoms, and at the same time introduces a panchayat system. Now, India was basically a symbol of democracy and it wanted Nepal to become a democracy. So, because India wanted Nepal to become a democracy, what basically happened was that India was not very happy with this. But at the same time, we do not have to interfere because that is what is the perception in Nepal. So, what happened was that now there is a strong tilt of Nepal towards China. Okay. So, between this particular time, we see that there is a tilt towards China. And subsequently, the most shocking point came in 1962. In 1962, there was an unprovoked aggression by China towards India, and the Chinese military actually, you can say, invaded India. So, at that particular time, Nepal maintained an absolutely neutral stance. It did not condemn the Chinese action on Indian soil, and this is something which actually surprised India. Okay. So, that is how we basically see that right from 1960, China basically starts influencing Nepal. Okay. Then subsequently what happens is that China also influences Nepal to say that you have to get the posts removed. Okay. So, now China influences Nepal. For two things. The first one, removal of Indian personnel from its northern border. Okay, that's the first thing that they do. Now, the next thing that they do is basically that they are also importing weapons from China. These are the two things that they do. Okay, and subsequently we see that both of them are something which makes India extremely uncomfortable. Now, what happens is that there is again a you can say an entire round of uprisings in China, in Nepal, about curtailing of the freedoms of the people, and subsequently the people actually are the one who talk about this particular thing with respect to the king. They want a you can say a revolution again, and that is something which culminates in 1990. Okay, so in 1990 basically we have the first Jan Andolan. This is the first one. Okay. So, and in this particular time, what happened was that after a referendum that was conducted, that what do the people want? People actually wanted to go for a multi-party democracy in Nepal. But what basically happened was that in 1990, this was done using a revolution. Okay. Because the king said that the referendum results have been different. They basically prefer Panchayati Raj. But then in 1990, the Jan Andolan started, and subsequently during this particular time, the government was restored. Now a multi-party parliamentary system comes into the picture. Okay. Then in 1996, there is a people's war. Okay. Now the Maoists in Nepal, they basically start a people's war. And this basically becomes a very, very bloody conflict between the Maoists and the Nepali security forces, that is basically the forces of the king. Okay. And subsequently what happens is that in this particular time, there is a lot of communication of the Maoists with the Communist Party of China. There is a lot of weapons import from that, and at the same time, these Maoists are also in connection to the you can say left-wing extremism of India as well. So a lot of money, weapons and propaganda is flowing not just from China to Nepal, but from Nepal to India via the left-wing extremism route. Okay. Subsequently, after this we see that in 2006, okay, now we directly come towards 2006, and in 2006 again a Jan Andolan comes up. Okay. Now this particular Jan Andolan is for complete removal of the monarchy. So this is basically called the Jan Andolan 2. and it results in the abolishment of monarchy. Okay, it results in abolishment of monarchy. And at the same time, during this particular time, the Constitution of Nepal is to be framed. So in 2007, we basically see for the first time Constituent Assembly elections take place in Nepal. Okay, and they could agree on one thing. So in 2007, they basically agreed on one thing, that first of all, Nepal will be a federal republic. It will no longer be a monarchy. That's the first thing. The second thing, Nepal would be a secular state. It will not be a Hindu kingdom, it will be a secular state. But what happened was that this Constituent Assembly, which started in 2007, it was removed from power in 2012 because it could not deliver a constitution of Nepal. Okay, and subsequently again in 2012 another elections took place, a new Constituent Assembly was found, and this Constituent Assembly finally gave a constitution to Nepal. Okay, now this constitution was promulgated in 2015. So in 2015, we basically see that Nepal actually gets a constitution which makes it a federal republic with 7 provinces. It is now a secular state, and at the same time, it is now a state which has got no monarchical powers. It is now taxing the monarchies and their estates, and at the same time, that taxation is used for welfare of the people. Okay, so this has been the journey of Nepal. So Nepal basically has not only seen 2 different uprisings of people, this is the third one, Jan Andolan third, that is basically being done by the Gen Z people. Okay, so this is the entire backdrop of the relations. So in this relations, Nepal has seen a topsy-turvy kind of relation with India. Okay, on many occasions, Nepal and India have shared very, very cordial bonds. On some of the occasions, there have been points when either Nepal was under the influence of China, or for that matter in 1975 when Sikkim willfully acceded to India, when Sikkim joined India as a full-time state. So at that particular time, the Nepal was having severe reservations because Sikkim before this was Kingdom of Sikkim. Okay, so there was a special association of Sikkim with respect to India. We'll discuss this in some other class. But as of now, you understand that before 1975, Sikkim was basically an associated state of India. It was not a part of India. In 1975, through a constitutional amendment, we basically have Sikkim becoming a full-fledged state of India. So there was an accession of Sikkim to India. Okay, so this is something which significantly enraged Nepal because at that particular time, Nepal was a monarchy. Okay, so that is why we see some of the elements of bitterness. But at the same time, this is something which India overlooked for its policy of ensuring stable and peaceful relations. Because for India, the larger picture is that we right now have a troubled relationship with Pakistan and we do not trust China. So apart from that, we need to maintain cordiality with all our other neighbors, like we have Nepal, we have Afghanistan, we have Bhutan, we have Myanmar, we have got Bangladesh. Okay, then at the same time we have Sri Lanka and so many of the states in the Indochina. We need to be very, very carefully calibrating our relationships. We do not want to pick fights with everyone. And that is why we have shown a lot of restraint to Nepal. But it does not mean that India never retaliated. Okay, India has retaliated at times and subsequently it has forced Nepal to accept some of its conditions as well. Okay, so this is basically the historical relations between India and Nepal. With respect to the cultural sites which are there between the two sides, we see that from the Nepalese side, the Indians actually visit Lumbini, Kapilavastu, Janakpur, then we have Kathmandu and the Swargdwari. Okay, the Nepalis actually come to India to visit the holy sites related to Buddhism like Rajgir, Sarnath, Kushinara or Kushinagar. Okay, then at the same time Bodh Gaya, and they also visit India for the Kedarnath pilgrimage. Okay, so we have very, very strong cultural ties. We have cross-border matrimonial ties as well. Okay, that's the cultural engagement. Now when we talk about the current engagement with Nepal, we are basically talking from 2014 till date. Okay, so between 2014 and 2024, 2014 to 2024. Why is this between these 2 years? Because when you talk about the bilateral relations, they are updated, or there you can say the entire bilateral relations which have happened are covered year wise. So between 2014 to 2024, there have been 17 visits at the level of head of states or governments. Okay, so this has involved 5 visits of the Prime Minister of India, okay, and 10 visits of the Nepalese Prime Minister. Okay, and the other 2 visits were basically the visits of presidents of the 2 countries. Once from Indian side, it was President Ramnath Kovind who went to Nepal, and in response, their president came to India. Okay. Now during this particular time, we also see that when we talk about the visits of Prime Minister of Nepal to India, this was also during one of the occasions when he was called in for the oath taking ceremony of 2024. So in 2024, we basically see that we have got a you can say the entire oath taking ceremony of 9th June. There the Prime Minister of Nepal was invited. Also, one of the first visits after this particular swearing in ceremony was basically to Nepal by the Prime Minister. So that is basically the high level visits. So there have been enormous number of visits that have taken place all through 1947 till 2024. Lot of visits from both the sides at the highest level of the government. Okay, that's the first thing. Now when you talk about the defense cooperation, okay, so with respect to the defense cooperation, we see that we have a very special force, place for the Gurkha regiment. Okay, so as of now, there are about 34,000 Gurkhas, okay, in the Indian Army. At the same time, what we also have is basically 39 regiments of Gurkhas. Okay. At the same time, the government of India also bears the pensions and reconstruction work for the former soldiers of the British Indian Army and at the same time the Indian Army. So the pensioners of the Gurkha regiment. Okay, that's the next thing, pensioners of the Gurkha regiment. And in order for this particular pensions to be disbursed, we have offices in Kathmandu especially dedicated to this. Okay. Apart from that, we also have a military exercise going by the name of Surya Kiran. Okay. So Surya Kiran is basically an exercise, also a previous year prelims question. Okay. So this is basically Surya Kiran is the exercise, military exercise between India and Nepal. So this is basically the defense cooperation that is there between India and Nepal. Okay. So now what headings we have covered? The diplomatic or the highest head of government level. We have covered the defense. Now a very important part is covering the trade relations. So when we talk about trade, so India is the largest trading partner of Nepal. Okay. Largest trading partner. In what sense? Okay. So in what sense? When you talk about it, so India basically is the one which has 64% of Nepalese trade is with India. Okay. That is basically the share of India in the Nepalese trade. So with respect to the amount, it is about US dollars 7.2 billion. Okay, that is the monetary worth of trade between the two sides. Most of the trade is basically Indian exports to Nepal. Okay, so about 5 billion US dollars is basically Indian exports, and 1.2 billion is basically Nepalese exports, Nepali imports to India. Okay, that's the first thing. Apart from this, what we also see is that India is the largest developmental donor. Okay, India is the largest developmental donor for Nepal. So this basically means that India is also the country which has the biggest investment in the development of Nepal. Now this development has been in the way of railways, highways, healthcare. At the same time, when you talk about this, they are called high impact community development projects. So there are about 573 such projects which are implemented from the Indian side in Nepal. Okay, India is also developing the first broad gauge line of Nepal. Okay, and at the same time there is a proposal for joining Kathmandu to Raksal via a broad gauge railway line. With respect to highways, we have developed the east-west highway of Nepal. Okay, so this is basically how India has contributed towards Nepal. Now talking about humanitarian assistance. Okay, with respect to humanitarian assistance, so there have been earthquakes. Okay, there have been two massive earthquakes in the recent past. The first one was in 2015. The recent one was in 2023. This was basically the Jajarkot and this was basically Kathmandu. Okay, for both of these, India mobilized not only relief material but also reconstruction package. Okay, so for 2015 purposes, we have reconstruction package of 1 billion USDs. And at the same time, within 6 hours of this earthquake, Indian National Disaster Response Force teams, Air Force sorties were the one which were mobilized for Nepal. Okay, so relief material and NDRF within 6 hours. After the 2023 Jajarkot earthquake, again 1000 crore reconstruction package was sanctioned. Okay, and at the same time, when you talk about relief material, so about 571 tons of relief material was sent within 48 hours. So that is basically how India has been the first responder in both of these cases. Apart from that, when you talk about COVID-19, okay, the pandemic which we all reeled under. So during this particular time, during COVID-19, Nepal was the first country to receive made in India vaccines. Okay, so this was basically the case. So that is how we basically have been a very strong and reliable partner for Nepal. Okay, so that is the humanitarian assistance, and this is basically the present engagement of India and Nepal. Okay, I hope this is something which is very clear. Now, defense cooperation we have discussed the developmental partnership as well, and we have discussed the trade relations. Now let us talk about what exactly are the outstanding challenges between India and Nepal. Okay, so the first challenge is basically a border dispute which is called the Kalapani Limpiadhura dispute. Okay, so remember I told you 1815 we had Treaty of Sugauli. Now Treaty of Sugauli in 1815, when we talk about this particular treaty, so it demarcated the boundary between India and Nepal. Okay, it basically said west of river Kali belongs to East India Company. I am writing it in very broken down terms. Okay, so it basically means all the parts west of river Kali belongs to East India Company. Now with respect to Kalapani dispute, okay, the whole point is the perception of the origin of river Kali. So this dispute is about the different perception of the origin of river. Okay, that's the first one. And this is the only major sticking point between India and Nepal. Okay, how we are going to see that? So when you talk about this particular dispute, so basically Nepal says, Nepal's argument, Kali originates from Lipu Lake, pass near Limpiadhura. I'll show that to you in the map as well, so don't worry. Okay, so based upon this, Kalapani region belongs to Nepal. Indian argument, Kali originates south of Kalapani as a small rivulet. And based on this, it says Kalapani belongs to India. Now this is the difference, and because of this area has been under you can say dispute. Now see, if we basically focus on this particular map, so here we see that with respect to Limpiadhura, so Limpiadhura is right now at this particular location, which we see as a part of Uttarakhand. Okay, that this is basically the region of Uttarakhand. Okay, so according to the Nepalese argument, the river Kali is something that actually originates near the Lipu Lake Pass. Okay, so all the region west of this is basically the region that belongs to India. Okay, so this region is basically the one which should belong to India, while Kalapani belongs to Nepal. But at the same time, when you talk about the next part, okay, India says that Kali actually originates somewhere from the south of Kalapani. So in that particular sense, the west is almost the entire region. And subsequently then what has happened, that this region belongs to India. So that is basically the primary dispute between India and Nepal, and we are yet to resolve it. The next is Susta region. So Susta region is basically a region which is lying in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Okay, now Susta region has been you can say a point of dispute because of the shifting of the river course. Because of the shifting of the river course, the river back basically is the one which demarcates the boundary between India and Nepal, and when the river course shifts its course, so basically the land which was formerly in India or in Nepal goes to the other side. So that is the second one. Okay, the third one, when you talk about the other factors, so the biggest factor is the Chinese influence. So China basically is trying to influence both Nepal as well as Bangladesh to join its major infrastructure projects and convince them to allow more amount of Chinese investment in these countries. Okay, so based upon this, what is going to happen, that these countries will be influenced in the future by China, and subsequently that is something which can actually be an alarming situation for India. Okay, so these are basically the challenges with respect to the you can say India and Nepal. Now when you talk about the border security structure with respect to the India-Nepal scenario, so that is something which actually is done by the Sashastra Seema Bal. Okay, so we have the Sashastra Seema Bal, which is actually a central armed police force. Okay, it's a paramilitary force of India established by the Sashastra Seema Bal Act. Okay, it's a paramilitary force. It basically means that it is not completely militarized. It basically knows tactical training. It has got a different function than defending the country. It is basically the one which guards the border. Okay, so it basically is established by the Sashastra Seema Bal Act. Okay, and its mandate is to guard the borders of Nepal, India, Nepal, and India, Bhutan. Okay, so that is basically the concept here. SSB, it has been established through the SSB Act, and it has been handed down this particular, you can say, structure. So the border guarding force here is Sashastra Seema Bal, and it basically has the challenge of you can say filtering out the suspicious activities, and also at the same time determining all those regions where illegal activities like drug peddling, human trafficking are taking place. Okay, so this is the primary border guarding force. Right now it is under high alert at the Nepal border. Okay, now apart from that, what we have are basically the intelligence gathering agencies. So both RAW as well as Indian Intelligence Bureau, both of them are active across the border in order to gather intelligence. Okay, one of their major concerns is basically the Pakistan factor as well. Okay, so what has happened is that in 1997 there was a passenger flight from India that was called IC-814. Okay, this particular passenger flight which flew from Kathmandu and was expected to come to Delhi was hijacked. Okay, and this flight was hijacked right from the passengers who boarded from Kathmandu. This flight was taken to Kabul. Okay, Kandahar, not exactly Kabul, Kandahar in Afghanistan, and it actually resulted in release of certain hardcore terrorists from the Indian side in exchange for the hostages. Now, because of the open border between India and Nepal, okay, there are a lot of probabilities that a lot of infiltrators from Pakistan actually are shipped to Nepal, and from Nepal they basically enter into India. So that is something which is a very, very strong concern of disturbing the internal, you can say, law and order situation in India, and at the same time mounting terrorism attacks in India. Okay, so that is why the forces are always in high alert. Okay, so that is basically the concept of you can say the border security forces. Now let us talk about what exactly is the role of social media and how does it actually you can say pose a challenge to the security organization. So when you talk about social media, okay, so this is basically a place which actually has got a lot of information. So one of the first and foremost thing that actually is the challenge for internal security is basically misinformation. Okay, now misinformation is something which is voluminous. Okay, it is voluminous. And why does this misinformation spread rapidly? That is because of two things. One is called algorithm amplification, and the other one is called echo chambers. Okay, so with respect to algorithm amplification, that is basically a way in which the algorithm of social media reads the kind of reaction that is coming to a post. So the posts which are liked more, on which comments are more, which engages the public more, they are basically the ones which are promoted by default by these algorithms. Okay, so it is found that this algorithm amplification is something which does not give time for fact checking. Okay, it does not give time for fact check, and subsequently it has been often responsible for a lot of law and order situations. Whatever goes viral is something that you are going to find very easily. That is something which is algorithm amplification. The next thing, because of this, what happens is that there are certain echo chambers. Now echo chambers is basically a term in the media where whatever comes to your mind or whatever is introduced to you, now this is something which will be repeated over and over via various media. Okay, so subsequently then what happens is that you start developing a perspective out of it. Have you ever seen that when you are trying to watch a kind of video or a media on any of the social media, after some time you see that there is a complete repetition of the same pattern. Let us say that you are watching cute panda videos. Okay, so after some time your social media feed will be filled with this panda videos only, filled with cute animals only. Why? Because that is what the algorithm is reading. This is what is engaging you, and engagement is basically their business. Okay, so then what happens in such a scenario, instead of this, let us say that you are actually watching something which is you can say of some kind of extremist or controversial content. Now when the algorithm reads or picks it up, it is going to give you more on this, and subsequently this is something which structures your thinking. Okay, so this is something which is going to consolidate. It consolidates misinformation. And when misinformation is something which is consolidated, this is something which is going to lead to radicalization or propaganda. Okay, this is something which will lead to radicalization. Another challenge. Okay, then at the same time, with respect to social media, it is also something which actually is responsible for identity tracking. Okay, and at the same time they are the ones which are then used by recruitment, just like when you talk about ISIS, when you talk about Al-Qaeda. So they basically have very structured online global recruitment campaigns with respect to social media. Okay, and at the same time there is also bullying. Okay, examples here are ISIS, online recruitment rackets. Okay, then at the same time social media is also responsible for, you can say, disrupting the social harmony. Okay, social harmony can be disrupted. The elections can be manipulated very easily using something called deep fakes. So deep fakes are basically artificial intelligence generated videos which basically are generated after a lot of hit and trial. Okay, so here the individual who may be seemingly doing an act is not actually doing it, but the artificial intelligence has actually generated this video and it is looking so real that you are not able to distinguish what is real and what is fake. Okay, and because of this there have been a lot of different kinds of you can say disturbance in social harmony. For that matter, communal tensions have inflamed. Okay, for that matter, you see that elections get manipulated, people get targeted, public assassinations have taken place, and sometimes they have not been taken place but still they have been displayed in a manner. So in this particular manner, the social media is something which challenges the internal security at a lot of different steps, and the whole challenge is basically the sheer amount of social media content that is generated every single day. So it becomes very difficult for the internal law enforcement agencies to keep track of every single one of them. And then at the same time there is a very fine line that is basically there with respect to freedom of expression and at the same time the you can say the misinformation campaign. So even if you overstep this, you are going to be curtailing the freedom of the people, and then even the Supreme Court is the one which treads carefully in that particular case. So this is basically the challenge of internal security as well. Okay, and the current you can say the way in which this has been coordinated, a smaller version of that was also seen in India with respect to the Citizenship Amendment Act protests in 2019. Okay, that time also it was used extensively, and in this particular manner we see that a lot of things can actually be done through social media. So with this we finished this entire session. It was definitely a long session, but I wanted to touch all the points which are of importance for you, and subsequently I also would want you to very carefully take down the notes of this, because you may be expecting a questions in mains in the next examination. Okay, so please like, share and subscribe. If you like this, please do comment as well. Tell us what exactly do you want more, and we will be coming out with more such videos, and take it on my word that this will be a free of cost thing for you, but no one is going to deliver you with this quality. Okay, so see you next time. Thank you.